This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On this episode, a conversation with the man behind AS220, Umberto Crenca. And this conversation with Bert Crenca going back to earlier this year before the COVID-19 pandemic struck here in Rhode Island. So this is actually recorded at the Loft, and this episode is a fascinating look at the visionary behind, frankly, a Providence and Rhode Island institution, and broadly speaking, an independent arts institution on a global basis. So sit back, relax. A great Rhode Islander, a great member of the Providence community, visionary, entrepreneur, and artist Umberto Crenca here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast. All right, let's get right into it. Let's talk about it. I'll set it up. I do a big intro and everything, so I'll do a monologue.
Yeah, I listened to a couple of your things. Okay, it sounds really good.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. All right, so let's get right into where did the concept for AS220, the concept for working in Providence, where did that all sort of originate from? What was that spark that brought you to just moving in any direction of that nature?
Well, I was born in Providence, so I was born in Providence. When I was first born, we lived on Atwells Avenue. Eventually, my father bought a little house from the GI Bill in North Providence. So I grew up early years in North Providence, and then by the time we were 19, I moved back. I moved back to Providence with a friend. We got an apartment in Providence. I'm going to shut this off, man.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all. The beauty of the podcast, you can do whatever we want.
All right. Anyway, the question was, how did it all get started? Providence, the idea of investing in Providence and creating AS220, I suppose. Well, in 1983, I did an exhibit at the Steeple Street in the Antonio de Toro Studio Gallery, kind of a coming out party. It was like my first one-person exhibit of my artwork. And that show was reviewed by Channing Gray, and it was severely panned by Channing Gray. A lot of political work from the time, so our involvement in Central America and stuff that was going on in Poland and all this stuff. So I did all this artwork. He panned it. A lot of people came to the show. At that time, Providence was in pretty rough shape, and most artists in this town, a lot of artists at least, and musicians and whatnot, were trying to get out. I mean, they were trying to go someplace else, Boston or New York or wherever, and the scene was really suffering. And it's not as if there wasn't some legacy here in Providence, because the whole Benefit Street scene in the 50s and early 60s, and there were some pretty cool characters here, sort of from the kind of beatnik era in Providence. But in the 80s, early 80s and mid 80s, the city was about at its lowest point, you know. So we did the show. It got panned, and a lot of artists read about it. And then a man named Stephen Emma wrote an op-ed piece criticizing the critic. And that was sort of created this dialogue in the paper over this exhibit, and a lot of people came. So a bunch of us started meeting at my abandoned house, which I was in the middle of going through a divorce. Abandoned in the sense that my wife is gone, and I'm holding this house down until I figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And we created this manifesto. And the same person who wrote the op-ed piece, Stephen Emma, who was a poet and a sculptor, he would take notes, and then he'd go away, and then he'd come back with a manifesto, and then we would read it, we'd critique it, we'd fight, we'd cry, we'd yell, we'd scream, and then he'd go back and make some more changes, and then he'd come back with the manifesto again until there was some consensus. But at the end of the day, there was only three of us who were willing to sign it, and that was myself, Steve Emmer, and Martha Dempster. And Steve and Martha were married. She was a dancer. And we sent it out as a press release. And a lot of the newspapers gave us some attention. The weekly newspapers and the Journal made reference to it. And then a lot of people started contacting us and said, well, you know, it's easy to complain. And the manifesto basically trashed everything in the art world. Yeah. Museums, everything.
Just the whole infrastructure.
The whole infrastructure, yep. That it was elitist and that it was, very exclusive in many ways, you know. This got some attention in the newspaper, and we started getting calls of people saying, well, what would you do differently? How would you do it better? So we decided to do an exhibit called the Rhode Island Art Event, and it was open to anybody. All you had to do was show up or work within a certain date or time frame, and we would hang the work. And then Brown let us use, and that was also at the Steeple Street Gallery, Antonio de Toro's gallery. And then Brown University let us use the Ashamu Dance Studio for performances, and we put on this show. A few hundred people, I suppose, participated in one way or another. It wasn't like it was like millions of people showing up or anything like that. But frankly, that whole process of doing the exhibit, getting the painting review, the convening of people, the writing of the manifesto, the reaction to all of that is where the concept of this idea of unjuried and uncensored, this idea of just creating a forum or a nurturing environment where anybody and everybody would have the opportunity to perform or exhibit, that's where that concept came. After that, we got some attention, and one of the people who sort of reached out and came to the show was a man named Henry Reisman, who ran a place called the New England Center for Contemporary Art, which was basically a converted chicken farm in Brooklyn, Connecticut. Not to be confused with Brooklyn, New York.
Slightly different atmosphere.
Very different atmosphere. And he invited me to do a residency on his chicken farm art center, which converted a barn to a museum and this and that. And it was a tremendous experience. In fact, in name at least, Françoise Gillot was his artistic director. I don't know if you know who Françoise Gillot was. She was married to Picasso and wrote a book called Life of Picasso. That's an amazing, amazing, amazing tell-all. I never met her. She was on the books. I don't know how Henry got her to sign up and name it the artistic director. And Henry also had these contacts in New York. So I got a lot of exposure through Henry about what the art world and how it all worked in New York. And Henry managed to bring a lot of different artists from Europe to the United States. And one in particular that he brought to the United States was a man named Chen Yifei, who was a Chinese artist who had never exhibited. China had not exhibited artwork, and this was in the 80s, early 80s. So it was the first contemporary artist from China that was exhibited in the United States, and it was at this chicken farm first. And then the work was brought to a big gallery in New York. Henry had wrote the Chinese government saying that he had this rural gallery, which they liked, and if he wanted to build a rapport. The first works they sent us were all these prints on rice paper, all like happy folks working in the fields in China or in factories, and it was all propaganda kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And then eventually we started working with contemporary art. So that happened, and I traveled. After that, I left. I went to Europe. I did a 3-month backpack trip in Europe. I went to all these places, like a kind of a pilgrimage, going to places where Van Gogh painted and lived in the south of France, Arles, and going to Avignon, going to all these different Paris, of course, and I hit a dozen different European cities and countries at least over that 3 months, and also went back and touched base with my Italian roots, with family that live in Italy, because my father was born in Italy. Came back and said, what am I going to do now? I didn't have a job. I didn't have a house. I didn't have anything, Well, actually, there's something in between. I actually made some connections in Italy and went back and did a show in Italy of my work. So I did an exhibit of Italy, then came back, had very little money, decided what am I going to do, and decided to create a place that was an unjuried, uncensored environment for any and all artists who wanted to do their original material and develop, and that we wouldn't sit as a jury or a judge, that everybody would get an opportunity. And that was in 1985, and that was the beginning of the story. Started on the 3rd floor of P-PAC. That didn't work. Then moved around the street to Richmond Street and moved into a boarded-up, non-functioning building. And we managed to get heat and electric running without permits or inspectors or any of that stuff. We started living there. Now, you got to understand, the downtown was at this point, this is in 1985, was fundamentally boarded up. I I mean, so we had the run of the entire downtown. It was kind of our playground. And that was the beginning. So that's that story.
Let's talk about the unjuried, uncensored element of that of AS220, and that's something that, I mean, if you have Rhode Island band members, for example, that was like sort of the only qualification that you had to have when I was growing up to play at AS220, just because of the demand. Like, breaking it's an early take on, I guess, what became sort of indie / DIY / punk art broadly, I guess media broadly, that we now is sort of mainstream today almost, like the notion of the alternative, so to speak, and that open mind. But that was a groundbreaking experience for you. I mean, you had comparable things happening in D.C. or on the West Coast in punk scenes, but to think of it in terms of broad art, it sounds like you were out front.
Yeah, I think the unjuried, uncensored idea that anybody and everybody got to perform, that was unprecedented. That did not exist. That didn't exist anywhere, and although we primarily featured local artists, we did have artists from all over the world who performed at AS220 on a regular basis, people who were touring through. I mean, we had a lot of people from the New York downtown scene when the sort of prog rock and all this wild stuff, like, Michael Dorff from the Knitting Factory in New York. He played he didn't play. He had a partner that they were coming to New York from Minnesota, I think they came from, to start a record label, and they had his friend had a band called Swamp Thing, I think it was, and they played at AS220 before the Knitting Factory ever existed. I knew Michael Dorff, and we were block booking in the early days before he became famous and sort of like the peak of contemporary music. We were block booking with AS220 was block booking with the Knitting Factory and in Cambridge, the Middle East.
Sure.
And we would be on the phone all the time, and some band would be coming from Europe, and in Providence, if they got an anchor gig on a Friday or Saturday night in New York or Boston, they were looking to fill in dates. So for practically nothing or share of a door, we would get these amazing, amazing bands from all over the country and all over the world who would play on a Thursday night or a Tuesday night or a Monday night at AS220. So we ended up in this amazing loop to be able to experience all these phenomenal, very progressive things that were happening on an international level. So that, I don't even remember where we started on this question.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey, B-Town listeners, if you want some exclusive content and to help support the independent journalism, opinion, analysis, and entertainment that Bartholomew Town has become known for here in the Ocean State and beyond, head over to patreon.com/BartholomewTown. That's where you'll have the opportunity to become a B-Town insider. You'll receive exclusive monthly content, including podcast episodes that no one else will hear. This month we had Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, medical doctor and member of the COVID-19 Equity Council here in Rhode Island, giving some really keen insight on what the numbers mean for Rhode Island, how to prepare for the future. Great stuff there. Again, it's patreon.com/BartholomewTown. You'll also find some other ways that you can support the show right there on that page. Thanks to all of you for supporting the show simply by listening and spreading the word. And if you'd like to help, you can leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening right now. When you have an unjuried, uncensored, open mind in terms of curation, when you're really, and I've seen every type of music imaginable, every version of modern and classical art, presented at AS220. And when you have that sort of wide scope, it almost creates a narrow scope in terms of your identity. People know exactly what AS220 means, even though it is so open and uncensored and open-minded in general, if that makes any sense.
No, it's interesting you should say that, because it was a really, really hard sort of uphill battle to get people to understand what we were trying to do and why it was important. Nobody in the beginning, including artists, got the idea. Or anybody? Well, in fact, a lot of artists were sort of like, why would I perform there? They were more interested in performing at Lupo's or the Met or getting into a fancy gallery, until they started to realize that those places weren't as accessible as we would hope. And they were doing original material. They had no place to do it. And then AS220 would get a knock on its door and say, can I do my thing here? And then, all of this wild stuff was happening at AS220 as a result of that. I think, Bill, the whole idea, the way we think about culture and who gets to share in it and who gets to participate in it is a very elitist and classist thing. Not, there's a lot of young people who don't get the opportunity to take art classes or music lessons or do any of that stuff. And yet, just creativity is not discriminatory. It exists in every human being. We're born with it. It's a survival skill that we're born with, to be able to problem solve and figure things out. And so the idea, really, the fundamental idea of AS220 is really to create nurturing environments. So, a bunch of us wrote this thing called the compost theory. The idea that in a compost, you throw all this stuff in a corner and suddenly plants are growing out of it that you didn't even plant. But it happened because the environment is rich and fertile, right? So you create support systems and you create a fertile environment, and don't even worry about trying to predict what the next great thing is going to be or who that's going to be. You just provide the opportunity and the support, because frankly, historically, and I've said this many times in lectures and stuff, we're really lousy predictors of this stuff anyway.
Sure.
Henry Miller's books banned in Boston, Vincent van Gogh sold one painting, and it goes on, and hundreds of thousands of artists who died unknown and then whose work became celebrated later, or any of that stuff. So we're really terrible predictors. And most of the great movements in art and music were criticized when they were first exposed because they were new, different, and maybe experimental. So the idea is, and now to say that anybody and everybody is a lot easier said than done. There were things that have happened at AS220 on AS220's walls or stages that were critical of me personally, where people had a beef with me and they booked a show and they hung stuff, or stuff would happen on the stage, or stuff that politically or morally, even in some ways, was being presented that I didn't necessarily agree with. But that's the test, of do you really mean what you're saying here? We had a band, you should look them up sometime, called Impotent Sea Snakes from Atlanta. Oh, my God. Every song was ripping up Jews, Catholics.
Oh, man.
Everybody. Yep. Every song. They made their name. They wore women's negligee, and they would have flash pots and, smoke machines and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And they were brutal and vicious in terms of their lyrics and everything they did. They became quite well known eventually. But we presented them, and let the general, I think the whole concept is we don't need, maybe there's a little bit of anarchy in here, but we don't need people mediating for us.
Right.
We have the ability to judge. Now, where I draw the line is if that you're doing physical harm or anything. And I'm talking about a context, a stage, gallery walls, and I guess in many ways, those ideas and things that I disagree with, I'd rather see them publicly presented where I can confront the situation, rather than hiding in the middle of the woods at night, burning crosses.
Right.
Come over here, take the hood off, get on stage, and present your art, if there is such a thing in that genre, and subject yourself to public scrutiny and accountability.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm 100% convinced that that's one of the big problems that we have, maybe even Rhode Island, or just generally right now, as we've kind of gone into our little boxes. I even get criticism sometimes for having, from people on the left especially, I find, more in the progressive bloc. Oh, I can't believe you had X person on the show. And it's like, what are you talking about? This person's in the State House making decisions about everything that we're doing. How could you not want to have those facts presented, whether it's in an artistic format or otherwise? When we climb away from that, it's way more dangerous, in my opinion.
Bully for you.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think it's so important. Even like in my studio, I had on. I was watching those hearings on the what do you call it? What are they trying
Impeachment
to do?
Impeachment
deal. Yeah. And frankly, watching the rhetoric, if you think about the sophist in Greek philosophy, the idea of winning an argument and the art of it,
Yep.
and boy, it was playing out pretty amazingly. Independent of what your position is politically on any of it, watching democracy being played out in that way is pretty remarkable. And in what time in history and where in the world even today will you see a president be called to the carpet in the way that we've seen a dictator, a president, an emperor, a prime minister, to see that being played out the way it was being played out.
Yeah.
So I was really, trying to remove myself a little bit from my personal feelings about this obnoxious man that is the president of the United States.
Yeah.
And watching the process unfold was pretty impressive and pretty remarkable, and pretty
Yep.
intelligent,
It is, and I'm surprised that more people aren't willing, whether you support the president, you don't support, whatever it is, and for whatever reason that is too. If it's an informed or an uninformed loyalty, I'm surprised more people aren't willing to just say, all right, sort of that same mentality, right? Let's run. I support the president, so let's run through this process and watch it play out, you know, because I believe in the system, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And it goes back to something you're saying about anarchy. It's more, in terms of how a space can be created or in a world environment. I think it's more like anarcho-syndicalism, where there's some regulation just by the producers or whoever is in charge of it at some level, so that you're presenting the white supremacist band or whatever they were, but at the same time, if physical, they're not able to just start throwing monitors at patrons. There are some limits. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I also think. There's been billions of books and versions of the, and definitions of anarchy, and this country had its day at one point. Sacco and Vanzetti were, basically hung in Boston for being anarchists. But I think there's a lot of misinterpretation about the fundamental tenets of anarchy. There is something very hopeful and optimistic about anarchy in the sense that there's a fundamental belief that human beings are capable of governing themselves and that they don't need this higher authority dictating their lives and their actions and their behavior. And there's something very positive about that, in my opinion. And again, I don't claim to be an anarchist. I don't claim to be a socialist. I don't claim to be a communist. I don't claim to some things that I've been accused of being. We have an equal pay policy at AS220. It's the unjuried, uncensored environment. So a lot of people try to sort of force that under the moniker of socialism or this or that. I don't know. It just seems right.
Yeah.
And it's about equity. Like when we develop, and I want to make it clear, I'm retired from AS220, although I'm still very involved. Shauna Duffy and the crew over there are doing a remarkable job of running that place, and Angel and Ruth and whatnot. But shout out. AS220 was always meant to be a community resource and a community asset. And so like the equal pay policy, I promised people from the stage that if there'd be more money, there'd be more jobs. And I also had said that I don't see how any of the jobs are associated with what we're trying to build here or any of the tasks are one more important than the other. They're all critically, interrelated. So, I was speaking at the Kennedy Center to culture bearers from all over the world. Really some really remarkable people doing remarkable stuff, some of them putting their lives at risk. A woman who was doing programming in Pakistan that she could have disappeared any day for what she was doing, and nobody would have said two things about it. Really courageous people. And I was talking about the equal pay policy, and it was a guy from Zimbabwe raised his hand and said, I don't believe in this. This is bullshit, this equal pay thing. And I said, well, right now I'm here. It's like 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm speaking at the Kennedy Center, the National Theater. I'm staying 2 blocks away in a 4-star, 5-star hotel. While I'm doing this, is somebody cleaning AS220. If we don't clean it, we don't open. we don't open, I got nothing to talk about.
That's right.
Right? And I'm staying in a 5-star hotel, being treated like a prince. So, how is that job not any more important, less important than what I do, And, people think I'm full of shit when I say these things, but I'm completely sincere about that.
Yeah.
I mean, greed and ambition and all these things are the things that fuck all this up. That's why we have trouble with politicians, because they're instantly compromised because of their ambition. They're thinking further ahead. No, I want to be the governor now. I want to be a senator. I want to be this or whatever it is. And that ambition automatically puts them in a kind of compromised position where they want to maintain, their base. They want to do this. They want to do that, whatever the case may be. What about what's right? Independent of what that may mean in terms of your particular future, particularly when you're a public servant, in theory at least, So I always felt that I was a public servant, and to this day I feel the same way. And I kind of assigned myself to a life of moderate poverty, which I accept, It's a kind of Nietzschean idea that, wealth brings obligations that sort of limit your freedom in many ways. Poverty does the same, limits your freedom in so many ways when you're having to be focused, like in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to be focused about just trying to get some food or a shelter over your head. But someplace in between is a very free place to be, with minimal obligations outside of what your conscience tells you is right and what's wrong,
That's a beautiful thing. Let's, in the last couple of minutes here, let's talk about provenance. One aspect of AS220 that's so significant, and as in my experience in Brooklyn, living in lofts, eventually opening a space that was a performance space, live, work space, etc. The big mistake that we made was we didn't own the building. So eventually, now you go down there, it's this awesome, fancy bar. They got hummus and and little baskets. I mean, it's way beyond anything like what we had. Yeah. And of course, that's a smart move by the person who owned the building to wait it out, and then now probably quadruple or beyond the rent. At the same time, little pockets like that in Bushwick, there were maybe a dozen of us. Now there's 0 in Brooklyn. So Dumbo, same thing, exactly.
And it was very, very consciously done in Dumbo.
Yep.
I met with artists there when they were first given cheap rent to be there, with the full knowledge that the landlord was very transparent. It says, you're not going to be here for long, but if you want to take advantage of this while it exists, and, so it raises issues of gentrification and things like that. But I always have professed ownership, artist ownership of space, It gives you a very different voice at the table. A sense of permanency and sustainability, I mean, now AS220, a lot of artists in the community look at it as an institution, which to me is a hoot. And we're living in an unheated building for 5 fucking years, and whatever, But I think the idea of ownership is important, and the idea of gentrification is also important. I think these things can be done in ways that, first of all, I love when people say artists are gentrifiers. Artists are not gentrifiers. Developers are gentrifiers. City planning departments are gentrifiers. Banks are gentrifiers. Artists are not gentrifiers. Artists move into unheated buildings with high lofts and see an opportunity because the rent is cheap, and they live there and they make shit happen, and all of a sudden they're the gentrifier. Well, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. Now, artists moving into a community that they're not they didn't come from or grow up in, I think there are sensitivities that they should be aware of the environment they're in, and they should be communicative and and responsive in those neighborhoods, of course. But at the same time, what artists do is they bring value to things that other people don't value, whether it's making art out of trash or sort of environmental consciousness about what they do, and or big empty spaces that nobody sees this value anymore, and artists say, wait a minute, this is cool, and I want to do something here. So part of what we do in our function, our mission as artists, is to sort of shine a light on things and bring value where value has been lost, or So the idea of ownership, continuity. I mean, I think one of the things that AS220 has done so well is that it is a hub, and it has generated many things, and a lot of art spaces and stuff that exists, and youth programs that exist in Providence. AS220 was very instrumental in helping these folks make those things happen. And so I like the idea, and I like the term generative space. What's a generative space? Who gets to access it? How do people get to interact? And what's generated from that space? That's what serves community. That's what keeps things moving forward. That's what keeps us questioning, and just like your podcast. This is your podcast is a generative space in a sense. By bringing a diverse group of people in here, exposing a lot of these kinds of conversations in the way you do, what kinds of thinking happens for the people who are listening and the people who are participating, and how are people being affected as a result of the experience? So that's a long-winded answer and I'm not even sure if I answered the question.
No, that's. I gave a couple of fist pumps during that, so that's a great answer. Put it that way. 2 minutes, Providence right now. I mean, you can look at it in a lot of different ways. You can look at it as it's just exciting times. There's a New York Times article yesterday talking about, or it was in the Sunday Times. Yesterday. So talking about no more loft spaces in Brooklyn, no more artist spaces in New York. Everybody's moving to Providence and Philly. So you see that, and they're okay, great. And I'm like, wow, that's the same thing they did to us in Bushwick. That's the same way they pushed us out and running front page real estate articles about the buildings. But, at the same time, we see obviously there's the fiscal challenges balanced with against the, you got the fiscal challenges, the schools, public transportation, all these obvious issues.
Housing.
And then number one, really affordable housing right now.
Yep.
And environmental racism. I mean, the list goes on. At the same time, there is stuff to be excited about. But then, I like the pedestrian bridge and I like going down to the Wexford building and all that. But that's not really the complete picture at all either.
Wexford building is half empty.
Oh, right.
Listen, I'm glad you asked this, because I really think what's happening, frankly, artists and culture is what created the buzz in Providence, and so much of these developers and everybody has really benefited from us making a scene, okay? And we did, and that was very intentional. It was very intentional when we started AS220. No, don't go to New York, don't go to Boston. Let's make it happen right here, and then maybe you'll get plucked by some gallery in New York or some club in New York or whatever, but we don't need that. We can do it here, and we can do it locally. And frankly, by creating that scene, Providence kind of became hip, and all of this great shit has been happening. But we haven't addressed any of those issues in a visionary way. So what this damn city is lacking is a comprehensive vision. Where are we going? Where are we heading? Where every human being and every resident of the city of Providence has a sense of where we're headed. And so we should have a vision that's comprehensive, that talks about what transportation would look like, ideally, what affordable housing and the opportunities for various kinds of housing would look like ideally. Do we have the money, the resources, the capacity to get there right now? No. But where are we headed? How are we making the decisions, the next decision? Where are those decisions leading us in a comprehensive way? Now, I want to be respectful of all the people that are working their ass off trying to get affordable housing in Providence, or trying to deal with transportation issues and represents the general public and not just one small percentage of the population, or whatever the other issues we were talking about, the public school system. I was on the school board for 3 years in Providence, an appointed position. I didn't run. I run from such things ordinarily. But we're lacking a vision. What's the vision? Where are we headed? What do we want to see for Providence? And there are things happening in crazy places, like Colombia. I mean, not crazy, wonderful, progressive shit happening in Colombia and Bogota and Medellin and in Brazil and Curitiba and Barcelona's doing unbelievable stuff.
Berlin,
Berlin's been sort of on the head of the curve for a long time. But I mean, really progressive things that are comprehensive visions that take all of these things into consideration. And painting a picture for the residents of this community, where we all realize that we're trying to pull in a direction that's, again, the health issue and stuff. Rhode Island province isn't half bad, considering a lot of other places in terms of health and the way we rank statistically and stuff, but taking care of kids and whatnot, but not enough. And that whole system's so corrupt with the pharmaceuticals and all of that and procedures and everything. But anyway, so I think that's what's lacking. I mean, I'm just looking forward to somebody who wants to run for mayor who can paint a comprehensive vision, who isn't afraid, who's really transparent. That's another thing that happens generally in politics and in city government and government in general is this fear of transparency. And a lot of that has to do with ambition. Yeah.
Right. You don't want to show your hand for what's coming next.
That undermine, you want to, and you undermine stuff. Even when we're talking about contracts, I mean, whether it be union contracts or this, there should be transparency. The entire community should be aware of what these conversations are, or these deals that are cutting. Mattiello up at the state. I mean, what are we talking about here? And what's the vision? So that's what I think is lacking. I think it's possible. I think there's phenomenal best practice throughout the world. I don't know that anybody's doing everything right anywhere in the world, but there are people who are doing some things really well, whether it be in any of these areas of transportation, education, whatever. And I think that's what we're lacking in the city. We need a new kick in the ass. We need a new vision.
Yeah, there was a question posed the other day on talk radio. What would your Mount Rushmore of Rhode Island be? And, I milled around my ideas or whatever. I came up with King Philip, Ida Lewis, and Jim Terracani. That's my answer. Leaving the fourth... In my case, leaving the fourth one open. Yeah. Put it right there as you're pulling it downtown, because I am totally with you that that person, he, or they are coming, and it's time, because it's getting to the point now where I sense that, I went to the Providence, the city archives, and I was looking at old maps of Elmwood here, and, I mean, not even that old, but just looking at the railway that used to be here, there was an Elmwood station. It just went right down Elmwood Avenue. I mean, where's that type of thing?
Sure. Yeah, and I be careful. We have to be careful of being too nostalgic about these things, because we live in a different world. But in terms of design and thinking and visioning, there's a lot of great stuff out there that we could reference in trying to paint that picture here. And I also think we got to be careful. Although I did say I'm waiting for that next mayor to sort of lead that charge, it's not about a person. It just can't be. It's got to be about an idea, and that idea really, really, really has to embrace the idea of equity and justice and opportunity. I taught for 5 years out at the Rhode Island Training School once a week, because AS220 has this relationship with the juvenile detention facility in Rhode Island. It's been ongoing for the last 20 years. And all I saw was a bunch of kids who lacked choice, who lacked opportunity, who were bored to tears. The worst thing in the world for a teenager is to be locked up with just all boys with little to stimulate or little to do. I mean, it's horrifying to see what that can do to the spirit of a human being. And a lot of those kids, they were entrepreneurial. They're on the street trying to make their way, in whatever way. You can say whatever you want, but if there were more opportunities or more paths that they could have chose from, it's very unlikely that they would have ended up in the detention facility, and that was another one of the things that I saw, and that's another thing that we created at AS220, is to try to create that kind of pathway for some of these young people, So anyway.
Onwards we go.
That's the story.
Yeah. AS220 forever, though, that's for sure.
There you go.
All right.
Agreed.
Uncensored, unjuried. Pretty much like Bartholomew Town. I think there's probably only one or two people that I'm trying to stay away from in all of the Rhode Island atmosphere, but they haven't asked to come on either. So, okay. Let's put it that way. All right, thanks. That was great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Bartholomew Town Podcast. B-Town's election 2020 coverage is about to ramp up. Get ready for what we did in 2018 times a zillion. I've got a lot of new ideas and hope to bring you inside as many different races as possible and make you feel as comfortable and informed when you head to the polls this fall. Bartholomew Town's election coverage coming soon here on Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.